3 teenagers not even old enough to vote yet went to court this morning to face murder charges as adults.
They ruled the streets, commanded fear, and built reputations as some of the most ruthless women in crime. But even the toughest gangster has to face the cold steel of justice. Today, we're diving into the shocking moments when some of the most dangerous female gang leaders and killers heard the words they could never escape: life in prison.
All to be paid out of prison funds. You have 30 days within which to file a notice of appeal.
From Rosalie Shorty Garcia, who ran with a violent New York drug crew, to Susan Atkins, the Manson family member who shocked the nation with her crimes, to Jennifer Mee, once known as the Hiccup Girl, who spiraled from viral fame into a life sentence for murder. These are the raw reactions, the courtroom drama, and the chilling downfall of women who thought they were untouchable. Buckle up, these are the most dangerous female gang leaders reacting to life sentences. First up is Fetcha Torres. On October 17, 2018, Fetcha Torres, who was just 17 years old, stood with her head lowered as the judge began to speak. Alongside 2 other teenagers, she was about to hear the words that would change her life forever. The charge was murder. The sentence, life behind bars. The shock on her face tells it all.
You have 3 warrants for armed robbery and 1 warrant for felony murder.
An apparently shocked Fetcha Torres threw glares at her 2 co-defendants.
How did a young woman, once seen as just another high schooler, go down the path of gang violence? Torres was no stranger to the streets of Gwinnett County, Georgia. Investigators described her as tied to a small but dangerous group of teenagers who had turned robbery into a routine. Their crimes were quick, calculated, and often violent. But one night it went too far. A young man, 21-year-old William Tunches, was found dead along a walking trail in Suwannee. Children discovered his body. The community was shaken and police moved fast. Within days, they connected Torres and her crew to the killing. When the case reached the courts, the details were grim. Prosecutors painted the picture of a teenager who stepped into the role of leadership. Torres, though young, was no follower. She was accused of planning the robbery, luring the victim, and helping set the stage for violence. It was not only the act itself, but the sense of control she exerted over her group that convinced the jury she was more than just a participant. She was central. The trial exposed the dark contrast between her age and her choices. Family members of the victim sat in court, waiting for justice. They listened as detectives laid out evidence, from stolen belongings to cell phone records. Each fact stacked against her, making it harder for the defense to argue innocence. And so the momentum built. Finally came sentencing day. The judge's words were measured but heavy. Life in prison. No possibility of returning to the freedom she once knew. Torres looked intently at him at first, her expression steady, as though she believed some miracle might arrive at the last second. But when the gavel came down, her composure cracked. For the victim's family, it was a moment of relief mixed with sorrow. They had lost a son, a brother, a friend. No sentence could bring him back. Yet the punishment brought a sense of finality. The gang's violence would claim no more lives. Up next is Susan Atkins. On August 9, 1969, inside a quiet home on Cielo Drive, actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was murdered along with 4 others in a frenzy of violence so shocking that newspapers called it the end of the 1960s dream. And at the center of this storm was a woman named Susan Atkins, a name the world would soon know as one of the most dangerous female killers in modern history. She wasn't just any gang member, she was a soldier in the cult-like army of Charles Manson, a man who convinced his followers that murder was part of a twisted prophecy. When Susan Atkins went on trial in 1970, America wasn't just watching another criminal case, it was watching a spectacle. The courtroom became a theater, the defendants the unwilling stars, and the press couldn't look away. Susan Atkins, sitting alongside Charles Manson and other family members, played her part to perfection. She was young, striking in appearance, and utterly unrepentant. The media called her Sadie Mae Glutz, her bizarre family nickname, and plastered her face across magazines and newspapers. For months, she was treated almost like a morbid celebrity, a dangerous woman who smirked at the cameras as though she were walking a red carpet, not sitting on trial for one of the most shocking massacres in American history. And that was the sickest irony of all. While families mourned their loved ones, Susan Atkins seemed to enjoy the attention.
I didn't think anything about it.
What about
Do you want a,
Susan?
I think she's awful pretty.
do you want a press conference, Tony?
I don't feel...
But here's the question. How did a girl from a broken home become one of the most infamous killers of her generation? Let's rewind. Susan Denise Atkins was born in 1948. Her childhood was marked by instability. Her mother died of cancer when Susan was only a teenager, leaving her adrift. Her father struggled to raise the family, and Susan dropped out of high school. She was young, insecure, and desperate for belonging. That hunger for acceptance would make her the perfect target. By 1967, she drifted into the world of San Francisco counterculture, hippie communes, drugs, free love, all the things young people believed would change the world. But Susan wasn't just searching for peace, she was searching for family. And that's when she met Charles Manson, a man with a guitar, a hypnotic stare, and a dangerous philosophy. He promised freedom, love, and survival in a world he claimed was on the edge of collapse. To Susan, who felt lost and unloved, Manson seemed like the father she never had, and the savior she thought she needed. But what she didn't realize was this. She wasn't joining a family, she was joining a death squad. Manson gathered young people around him and fed them LSD, sex, and sermons about an apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter. In his fantasy, black Americans would rise up, kill the white elite, and when the dust settled, Manson and his family would emerge as rulers of a new world. It sounds insane, and it was. But under the haze of drugs and control, his followers believed it. They believed him so completely that when he whispered, "Kill for me," they obeyed. Susan Atkins became one of his most devoted soldiers. He gave her a new name, Sadie Mae Glutz. And then came the night that would make her a household name. August 8, 1969. Manson told Atkins and 3 others, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to go to the house at 10,050 Cielo Drive. His words were chilling. Do it as gruesomely as you can. That night, Susan Atkins walked into a nightmare of her own making. Sharon Tate, a Hollywood actress married to director Roman Polanski, was 8 months pregnant. Inside the house were her friends, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent. The killers were armed with knives and a gun. And what happened next was a storm of violence. Victims begged for their lives, but the attackers showed no mercy. In the chaos, Susan Atkins held Sharon Tate down. Tate pleaded for her unborn baby, but Atkins was unmoved. In 1971, the jury reached its verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Susan Atkins, Charles Manson, and the other family members were sentenced to death. For a brief moment, the families of the victims felt justice had been served. Atkins was going to pay the ultimate price. But then came another twist. In 1972, California's Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty. Overnight, Atkins's sentence was reduced to life in prison. She had escaped execution, and for many Americans, it felt like a betrayal. Susan Atkins was going to live, even though Sharon Tate and her unborn child never got the chance. In September 2009, Susan Atkins died at the age of 61. She had spent nearly 4 decades in prison. Her death closed her personal story, but not the questions it left behind. If you think that was chilling, then you need to see the case of Sierra Harp. On June 26, 2019, in Clayton County, Georgia, all eyes were on the defendant, Sierra Harp. She was already convicted of murder, guilty of shooting the father of her child, Raheem Grant, multiple times, in front of their young daughter. But no one in that courtroom was prepared for what came next. When the judge allowed Harp's mother to take the stand, the mood shifted instantly. Instead of defending her daughter, she did something no one expected. She attacked her. Her voice cracked with anger as she told the court that chaos seemed to follow Sierra wherever she went. She said her daughter lied, manipulated, and destroyed everything around her.
Envious nature took control, and you murdered Raheem for moving on without you.
The courtroom froze. Even seasoned reporters admitted they had never seen anything like it. A mother standing against her own daughter. And just when people thought it couldn't get any more shocking, she asked the judge for something extreme. She begged the court to sterilize Sierra Harp so she could never bring another child into the world. Sierra's response? Not tears, not regret. She sneered, she mouthed a profanity. She even called her own mother a female dog right there in open court.
Mother asked for the stiffest punishment possible, life without parole. Harp sneered at her mother and mouthed a profanity and called her mother a female dog. Now,
it was chaos layered on top of tragedy. An emotional spectacle that exposed just how broken this family had become. Let's go back into what led to this. In December 2018, Raheem Grant, a rising local rapper and father, was at home with his little daughter. Sierra Harp, the child's mother, was there too. At some point, the tension between them exploded into violence. What makes this case even more disturbing is that Harp herself recorded the shooting on her phone. Over several agonizing minutes, she shot Raheem again and again, while their daughter watched. Raheem begged for his life. In those final moments, he asked only to stay alive long enough to see his little girl grow up. Instead, his daughter became a witness to her mother killing her father. The evidence was impossible to deny. When the trial ended, the jury found Sierra Harp guilty of murder and aggravated assault. She was facing life in prison. But her sentencing hearing was where the true drama unfolded, because that was when her own mother turned against her, and the family's private wounds were ripped wide open for the world to see. For many watching, the moment carried a haunting message. Sometimes the most powerful condemnation does not come from a judge or a jury, but from blood, from family, from the people who know you best. In the end, Kiera Harp was sentenced to life in prison plus 63 years. And that leads us to the case of April Stone.
All to be paid out of prison funds. You have 30 days within which to file a notice of appeal.
October 12, 2010. The air inside the courtroom was heavy. Reporters crowded the back rows, victims' families filled the benches, and everyone waited for the moment they knew was coming. At the front, April Stone stood in silence. She was dressed in a plain prison jumpsuit, her dark hair tied back neatly, but her eyes told a different story. Wide, restless, as if she still hoped for a miracle. When the judge spoke the words, the entire room shifted. Life imprisonment, without parole. The gavel struck, and just like that, the woman who once commanded an army on the streets was stripped of her empire. Some in the audience gasped, others sighed with relief. But April broke down in tears, not the fearless queenpin the media had painted, but a woman realizing she would never walk free again. But how did it come to this? How did April Stone, once described as the ice queen of the blocks, rise to the top of a violent empire, only to end up chained by her own ambition? Let's go back to where it began. April wasn't born a criminal. She was born into poverty, into a city that had forgotten entire neighborhoods, abandoned buildings, failing schools, and streets where sirens replaced lullabies. That was her world. And like so many, she learned early that survival meant choosing sides. In April 2010, it was still dark outside when 72-year-old Lincoln Burks woke up in his small East Side Buffalo apartment. He was a quiet man, living alone, and he had no idea that within hours his life would be cut short in a crime that would shake the neighborhood. That morning, police believe, April Stone made her move. She was 33 years old, unemployed, and known in her community for drifting through life without much direction. But what she did next went far beyond desperation. It was cold, violent, and final. Stone grabbed Burks by the throat and strangled him. Investigators later said the attack happened at around 6:30 a.m. Once Burks was dead, Stone allegedly stole his car and his credit card, fleeing the scene and leaving behind a body that wouldn't be discovered until hours later. But this wasn't just another homicide case in Buffalo. This was different. The brutality of the act, the vulnerability of the victim, and the strange details that followed turned April Stone into one of the most talked about women in the city's criminal history. It was just after midnight when a relative walked into Burke's apartment on Cornwall Avenue. What they found was horrifying. The elderly man lifeless, no signs of forced entry, no chance of revival. Police quickly ruled the death a homicide. The neighborhood was stunned. Burks wasn't a man involved in trouble. He lived quietly, kept to himself, and had no known enemies. So why would someone target him? And here's the part that caught detectives' attention. There were no signs of a break-in. Whoever entered that home either had his trust or had found a way to get inside without forcing the door. That detail would later become critical in unraveling what really happened. For weeks, detectives kept silent. They refused to say if the victim knew his killer. They gave no details about how the suspect entered the home. It was a wall of secrecy that frustrated reporters and kept neighbors on edge. But behind closed doors, the homicide squad was working non-stop. Detective Patrick Judge, along with Detective Mario Prats and Sergeant Jonathan Walton, pieced together the case bit by bit. The stolen car was a big lead. So was the stolen credit card. Each left a trail that led to her. And then, 4 weeks later, it happened. Police arrested April Stone inside Buffalo Police Headquarters on Franklin Street. The woman no one expected was suddenly charged with second-degree murder and second-degree robbery. At 33 years old, she wasn't the kind of hardened career criminal people usually picture in homicide cases. Instead, she was a woman adrift. No job, no stability, drifting in and out of low-level trouble. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because when April Stone sat in that courtroom, facing the weight of the evidence against her, she didn't look like the fearless predator described by police. She looked shaken, frightened, and out of control. The trial became headline news in Buffalo. Cameras caught every moment April was led into court, shackled at the wrists. For the media, she became a character straight out of a crime thriller. The Buffalo Strangler, the woman accused of betraying an old man's trust for a car and a credit card. And then came the moment of truth. When the jury found her guilty, April Stone broke down in tears. Gone was the cold mask she wore at trial. In its place was panic, the raw realization that she was never going home again. Next is Jennifer Mee, September 20th, 2013. The verdict came down inside a Clearwater, Florida courtroom. Guilty of first-degree murder.
You can see that Mee broke down right as that verdict was read. She was obviously hoping that the jury would convict her on a lesser charge, perhaps accessory to murder or manslaughter.
In that instant, Jennifer Mee, who once went viral as America's hiccup girl, broke. Tears streamed down her face as the reality hit. She had hoped, perhaps even believed, that the jury might spare her, that her role in the crime would not be punished so severely. But the words from the judge sealed her fate: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her mother couldn't bear it. She walked out before the sentence was read, only to later hear the crushing truth: her daughter would spend the rest of her life behind bars.
But she did not want to talk. Again, Mee's mother did not make it back into the courtroom in time to hear the verdict. Instead, she found out from family members that her daughter will spend the rest of her life behind bars.
What stunned the world was not just the crime itself, but the transformation. This wasn't the shy teenager who once hiccuped 50 times a minute on morning talk shows. This was a young woman branded as a manipulator, a gang accomplice, and now a convicted murderer. And as she wept in the courtroom, cameras rolled, capturing the final act of a story that had begun years earlier with a strange medical condition and 15 minutes of fame. But let's go back in time to understand how this American darling ended up in this situation. September 12, 2010. A cool night in St. Petersburg, Florida. A young man named Shannon Griffin went out, expecting to meet a girl. Instead, he walked straight into a deadly trap. By the time the night was over, he was shot and killed. The girl at the center of it all, none other than Jennifer Mee. Yes, you heard that right. The same teenage girl who became a viral sensation for her uncontrollable hiccups just 3 years earlier was now being called a cold-blooded orchestrator of murder. From television fame to life in prison, her fall was as bizarre as it was brutal. Jennifer Ann Mee was born in 1991. In 2007, at just 15 years old, she developed a case of extreme hiccups, which was at a rate of more than 50 times a minute. No doctor could explain it, and soon television cameras swarmed her Florida home. Talk shows invited her on. News anchors laughed and speculated. The world called her the Hiccup Girl. But when the hiccups stopped, so did the attention. The media circus packed up, leaving Jennifer behind with nothing but a strange form of fame and no real way to build on it. Behind that short-lived spotlight was a young girl from a broken background, struggling with identity, drifting into the kind of circles that make headlines for all the wrong reasons. This is where the story begins to twist. Fame had opened a door, but when it slammed shut, Jennifer was left looking for belonging elsewhere. And the place she found it was not in Hollywood, but in the streets. Fast forward to September 2010. By then, Jennifer was 19 years old. According to prosecutors, she lured 22-year-old Shannon Griffin out under the pretense of meeting for a date. But Shannon wasn't meeting a potential girlfriend that night. He was walking into a setup. Waiting for him were two of Jennifer's associates, Lamont Newton and LaRon Rayford. Prosecutors said the plan was simple: rob Shannon. But robbery turned to bloodshed. Griffin was shot multiple times and left to die. Now here's the kicker. Jennifer didn't pull the trigger. She didn't even fire a shot. Yet the law didn't care. Why? Because of the felony murder rule, a legal principle that says if you help plan or take part in a crime that results in death, you're just as guilty as the person who actually pulled the gun. That law would change Jennifer's life forever. After the arrest, Jennifer was placed in jail, and here's where things get dramatic. On a recorded phone call to her mother, Jennifer said something chilling: "I didn't kill nobody, but I set everything up." That single line would hang over her trial like a shadow. The prosecution played it to the jury. They painted her not as a bystander, not as a clueless teen, but as the mastermind, the bait in a deadly trap. That call became the prosecution's smoking gun. It was damning, and Jennifer knew it. In 2013, Jennifer Mee walked into court to face the charge of first-degree murder. The same media that once filmed her hiccuping now returned with cameras ready, eager to capture the hiccup girl transformed into a dangerous criminal. And finally, we have the case of Shaia McCoy and Erica Osborne. The Frank Murphy Hall of Justice in Detroit was heavy with silence on the morning of February 7, 2018. Family members of a murdered teenager filled the courtroom, waiting to see two young women face justice. On one side sat the defendants, Shaia McCoy and Erica Osborne. On the other side, the grieving family of 17-year-old Reginald Robinson, a high school student with dreams and talent who would never walk home again. Before the sentence was read, the judge gave the family a chance to speak. That's when the raw pain of the moment filled the room. Robinson's mother, voice breaking with anger and grief, looked directly at the women who killed her son. She told McCoy that every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself reliving the pain. Then she turned to Osborne, the shooter, and lambasted her too. The courtroom felt the weight of those words. There was no holding back, no politeness, just a mother's fury for the life stolen from her child. Both McCoy and Osborne tried to speak before the judge delivered their sentences. They said they were sorry, but their words were hollow in the face of such loss, and they did not even seem to mean what they were saying.
I wanted to make sure that the family knows that I am sorry. I apologize for my actions, whether you accept it or not, I apologize for my actions.
Then came the judge's ruling. McCoy, who drove the SUV that night, was sentenced to 16 to 40 years in prison. Osborne, who pulled the trigger, received 27 to 50 years. Now let me give you more insight into the case. On February 24, 2017, Robinson and a friend left a store on Detroit's west side. What happened inside seemed harmless. Robinson laughed when someone commented on the women's bodies, but outside that laugh turned deadly. Surveillance video later showed McCoy's blue Ford Explorer circling the lot. She made a U-turn, positioning the vehicle so her passenger had a clear shot. Then, without hesitation, Osborne fired, hitting Robinson. Police quickly pieced the case together, relying on video evidence and witness accounts. Prosecutors charged both women with first-degree murder. Facing the mountain of evidence, McCoy and Osborne took plea deals, admitting guilt rather than dragging the case through.